I never believed the stories about the Appalachian Trail. Not the disappearances. Not the strange sounds hikers claim to hear deep in the woods. And definitely not the rumors about the Silent Ranger. I thought it was just campfire garbage people repeated online to scare tourists. That changed in October of 2018. I worked as a seasonal fire lookout and emergency ranger near a remote section of the Appalachian Mountains in western North Carolina. The nearest town was almost 40 minutes away, and after sunset the roads became empty enough to feel abandoned. Most nights were simple. Lost hikers, drunk campers, the occasional black bear wandering too close to campsites. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The first strange thing happened on October 14th. A woman named Claire Dawson called emergency dispatch around 11:47 p.m. She was crying so hard the dispatcher could barely understand her. Her husband had disappeared from their campsite near Black Hollow Ridge. According to her, he'd heard someone whistling in the woods around 10 p.m. Not a tune, just a single repeating whistle. Same pitch every time. He grabbed a flashlight and left the tent to investigate. He never came back. By the time I reached the campsite with another ranger named Ellis, Claire looked half dead from fear. She kept staring into the forest behind us instead of making eye contact, like she expected something to appear between the trees. We heard footsteps around the tent, she whispered. Ellis asked how many people she thought were out there. Claire shook her head slowly. That's the problem, she said. It only sounded like one person. The forest around Black Hollow Ridge was unusually quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just cold wind moving through dead leaves. We searched until almost 3 a.m. No footprints, no blood, no torn clothing. It was as if her husband had simply walked into the darkness and dissolved. The official report called it an accidental disappearance. Exposure. Possible fall into a ravine. But before Claire left, she grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Then she whispered something I still think about almost every night. He came back once. I stared at her. What do you mean? Her face had gone pale. He stood outside the tent around midnight. Ellis frowned. You said he never returned. He didn't. The way she answered made my stomach tighten. She leaned closer. The thing outside the tent sounded exactly like him, but it wouldn't speak. Neither of us responded. Claire started shaking. It just stood there breathing. After she left, Ellis laughed it off. Shock does weird things to people, he said. But he avoided looking into the trees the entire drive back. 3 days later, another hiker vanished. Then another. All within the same stretch of forest. That's when locals started mentioning the Silent Ranger. Apparently hikers had reported seeing him for decades. Always alone. Always silent. An old park ranger wearing a dark green uniform from the 1960s. Sometimes people saw him standing near trails at dusk. Sometimes near abandoned fire towers. But the stories always ended the same way. Someone disappeared afterward. I asked an older ranger named Walter about it during a late-night shift. He stopped cleaning his coffee mug when I mentioned the name. For a few seconds, he just stared at me. Then he quietly asked, "Who told you about that?" I shrugged. "Locals." Walter muttered something under his breath. Then he walked to the office window and checked the parking lot outside before speaking again. "There used to be a ranger stationed up near Hollow Ridge back in 1961, he said. Guy named Arthur Mallory. I remember the name because Walter spoke it like it physically hurt him. He vanished during a search operation after a storm. Body never found. Walter shook his head. No body. No radio. Nothing. I tried smiling. So people turned him into a ghost story? Walter didn't smile back. You ever notice how quiet those woods get at night? That answer bothered me more than it should have. A week later, I experienced it myself. I was driving alone toward Fire Tower 8 after reports of illegal camping. Heavy fog covered the road, the kind that swallows your headlights. My radio kept crackling with static every few seconds. At exactly 1:13 a.m., I saw someone standing beside the road. An older man, ranger uniform, wide brim hat, perfectly still. I slowed immediately. At first I thought maybe another ranger needed help, but something felt wrong almost instantly. His uniform looked outdated, not old and damaged, old in a specific way. like clothing preserved inside a closet for decades. He stood with his hands behind his back, staring directly at my truck. I rolled down the window slightly. "You all right, sir?" No response. The man slowly raised one arm and pointed toward the woods. Not waving, not signaling, just pointing. Then my radio exploded with static loud enough to make me jump. When I looked back up, the man was gone. I slammed the brakes and grabbed my flashlight. No footsteps, no movement, nothing except fog drifting through TH. One note, repeating over and over. Same pitch every time. I left immediately. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not because I thought they'd laugh, because I knew they wouldn't. Things got worse after that. Hikers began reporting impossible landmarks. Staircases deep in the woods. Lights moving between trees. Entire sections of trail that looped back to the same location no matter which direction they walked. One man claimed he hiked for 6 hours and somehow ended up back at the exact same campsite with his watch frozen at 2:17 a.m. Most reports were ignored officially. Privately, the rangers talked about them constantly, especially Ellis. He stopped joking after my roadside encounter. One night, he admitted something to me while we sat outside the ranger station smoking cigarettes. "You know why people disappear out here?" I laughed nervously. "You tell me." Ellis stared into the darkness. "Because these mountains are wrong." I remember feeling irritated. What does that even mean? You ever feel like the woods are watching you? I didn't answer. Because I had. More than once. Ellis flicked ash onto the ground. My grandfather used to say there are places where nature stops behaving normally. Places where people accidentally walk into something they weren't supposed to see. "You actually believe that?" He looked at me carefully. "You saw him too, didn't you?" I never answered. But he already knew. 2 nights later, Ellis disappeared. His truck was found near Hollow Ridge with the engine still running. Driver door open. Flashlight on the ground. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just silence. Search teams combed the mountains for almost a week. Nothing. It was like the forest swallowed him whole. After that, I started hearing the whistling myself. Always late at night. Always far away. At first. Then closer. Every night it sounded nearer to my cabin. One evening I woke around 3 a.m. to footsteps outside. Slow. Crunching through dead leaves. Circling the cabin. I grabbed my revolver and looked through the blinds. Someone stood near the tree line. Motionless. Wide-brim ranger hat. I couldn't see the face. The figure simply stood there staring at the cabin. Then came the whistle. One note. Soft. Patient. I locked every door and stayed awake until sunrise. The figure never moved. At dawn it was gone. No footprints remained around the cabin. That's when I decided to quit. I packed most of my things the next afternoon. But before leaving town, I stopped by Walter's house. I needed answers. He opened the door looking exhausted. Like he already knew why I was there. "You've seen him again," he said quietly. I nodded. Walter invited me inside without another word. His house smelled like cigarette smoke and old paper. Stacks of files covered the kitchen table. Missing persons reports. Photos. Maps of the mountains covered in red markings. How many people vanished out there? I asked. Walter didn't answer immediately. Finally, he sighed. Officially? Around 60 since the 50s. My chest tightened. And unofficially? Walter looked at me with dead, tired eyes. Closer to 200. I thought he was exaggerating. Then he showed me the photographs. Families. Campers. Children. Tourists. Some dating back decades. All missing near the same section of forest. What is he? I whispered. Walter rubbed his face slowly. I don't know. He pointed toward one of the old black and white photos. It showed a group of rangers standing beside a fire tower in 1960. One of them wore a familiar wide-brim hat. Arthur Mallory, the silent ranger. There's one thing survivors always say, Walter murmured. What? They hear whistling before someone disappears. A cold feeling spread through my chest, because I had been hearing it every night. Walter suddenly looked terrified. How long since you first heard it? I swallowed hard. About a week. The room went silent. Then Walter stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Listen to me carefully, he said. If you hear the whistle close to your house tonight. He hesitated. Do not answer the door. That night I left town. I drove south for hours without stopping. No radio, no music, just highway noise and exhaustion. Around 2:30 a.m., I finally pulled into a gas station outside Knoxville. I remember feeling relieved for the first time in days. Bright lights, people, civilization. I went inside, bought coffee, and tried convincing myself everything was over. Then I noticed the old man standing beside Pump 4. Park ranger uniform, wide brim hat, motionless, watching me through the glass. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled backward hard enough to knock over a shelf. The cashier asked if I was okay. I pointed toward the window, but when she looked, nothing was there. I drove away immediately. I never returned to North Carolina after that. A few months later, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. Static filled most of the recording. Then a voice whispered, "Have you heard the whistling lately?" It sounded exactly like Ellis. The call lasted 17 seconds. Near the end of the recording, another sound appeared faintly beneath the static. A single repeating whistle. Same pitch every time. I changed my number the next day. That should have been the end of it. But sometimes late at night, especially when the wind is strong, I still hear it outside my apartment window. One note, repeating slowly in the dark. Waiting. And every time I hear it, I remember what Walter said. The mountains are wrong.